On the Hockey Canada case, I know some of you saw I made a video about it. It's not there anymore. I deleted it just because while in that video I didn't accuse anybody, I simply stated the facts that were available to the public from the teams themselves. I just don't feel totally comfortable mentioning specific names like I did in that video until we get confirmation of who exactly was or wasn't involved in this. And sure, you can say it's obvious and all these leaves of absence from that team at the same time can't be a coincidence, and you very well may be right. But this is such a delicate and serious subject that I don't want to mention names until we get confirmation. Thank you guys, I appreciate you. Last week, as the Habs were coming off 2 big wins against Colorado and New Jersey, the vibes were pretty high in Montreal. Caufield was starting to heat up in the goal-scoring department, Slafkovsky was gelling with Suzuki and Caufield on that top line, and even though it was somewhat of a pipe dream, it was still pretty surprising to see that they were only 4 points back at the last wildcard spot. Fast forward a week, now they're 8 points back at that last wildcard spot. They were coming off a 9-4 throbbing from the Bruins and a 6-2 throbbing from the Senators before that one, and instead of exacting the revenge on the Sens last night, Ridley Gregg is left all alone in front of the net, short-handed. None of Caufield, Matheson, or Monahan covered the puck or Gregg on that play. Jake Allen was left to do the pad stack starfish, and then less than a minute later that 1-0 lead quickly turned to a 2-0 lead. Then in the second, Shane Pinto gets sent in on a breakaway not from a nice stretch pass, not from a bouncing puck. Giroux banks it off the boards and it gets past both Montreal players, right to Pinto in all alone, and I'm still kind of in disbelief about that. He walks in and snipes his first of the year, the Sens win 4-1, and they grab their second win in 6 days over the Habs, both of which were by 3 or more goals. Here's the thing though. I don't think Habs fans are worried about that at all. This team wasn't meant to be in the playoffs or even in the playoff race this year. The goal for this year was to move along the rebuild while still being competitive enough to where your team isn't in a position where all it knows how to do is lose. I'm sure Habs fans wish they had better odds to get the first overall pick right now, but I think that in the long run, winning some games against Colorado or against the Rangers, that does wonders for the confidence of your young core. I know Caufield and Suzuki have been to a Stanley Cup final and that was huge for them, but they haven't been on a winning team since, so you gotta make sure those losing habits don't creep in and stay there for the long run. And I don't think they are. That's why for the most part, I think Habs fans should be pretty okay with where they're at right now. Another really interesting part of this is the coach. People seem to have been and are continuing to be really patient with Martin St. Louis behind the bench, and in a lot of places, after 2.5 years behind the bench without a winning season, quite a few fan bases would start to get pretty frustrated. I do think this patience from the fans and from the front office will be rewarded in the end though. St. Louis still growing and evolving as a head coach in the NHL. Remember, he came straight from coaching his sons in Connecticut to being the head coach of the Montreal Canadiens. Although it's pretty unlikely given that Kent Hughes, Jeff Gorton and company handpicked St. Louis for the job, it is possible that by the end of the rebuild the Habs have a different coach behind the bench, but I really think that St. Louis being young by coaching standards and being a breath of fresh air in the coaching world has really benefited these past couple of Habs teams who were full of exuberance and youth. Now it's time for the next step in this process though, and it's going to make things super interesting in Montreal here, the trades. The closer we get to the deadline, the more desperate some teams are going to be to get a goalie for their playoff run. Luckily, Montreal's got them in bulk, like their Lafleur hot dogs at the Bell Center. Montembeault's not going anywhere, I don't think. It seems like he's going to be the guy for the Habs going forward here. So that leaves Jake Allen and Caden Primo, and teams seem to be really singling in on Jake Allen because of his NHL experience and his reliable body of work in the league. I do think when push comes to shove, teams like LA and Edmonton will be ready to give the Habs a pretty nice return for Jake Allen. Then you've got the big one, Sean Monahan. Now there seems to be a bit of a debate going on right now about what Monahan's value actually is. Some people will tell you he can get you a first round pick, other people will say you're on drugs for thinking he can get you a first round pick. The market around deadline time is always weird and constantly changing. All I know is he's a good player, he's put up 31 points in 47 games, and a lot of that has been away from Caufield and Suzuki, so if you put him in Edmonton or in Vancouver or in Colorado, you could maybe even see some more offensive production, and that's just been 5-on-5. On the power play, he's worked really well on that top unit, alongside the team's best offensive players. That's valuable for a team looking to contend for a Stanley Cup as long as he stays healthy. That's the big thing here. We all know about his injury history. It would be silly to think that teams aren't at least a little bit concerned or weary of that when it comes to the trade market. That does not mean the Habs can't or won't get a really nice return for him though. I absolutely think if Kent Hughes plays his cards right, Habs fans will be pretty happy with what he can get for Sean Monahan. I'd love for him to stay a Montreal Canadian. I think he's a really cool fit there and he seems to have really gelled well with the team. But when you're in a rebuild like this, sometimes you can't afford to keep guys like that. If you get good assets for him, you gotta flip them. Kent Hughes is definitely smart enough to realize that, and they've gotten top 5 picks in the last 2 drafts, maybe on track to get another top 5 pick, at least a top 10 one in this upcoming draft. The rebuild is on track, it's going well, and Habs fans are realizing that for the most part anyways. My big question is, outside of those 2 guys that I mentioned, is there anyone else on this roster who could be involved in a deadline trade to help further the rebuild? Let me know your thoughts. If you want more Habs content, you know what to do. Like the video, subscribe if you're new. I'll see you in the next one. You're awesome.